my family is very interesting because my parents came from different backgrounds and they came from different parts of China. And my dad's family is heavily influenced by Western culture, but my mom's family is very traditional Chinese family. So I grew up with a lot of different beliefs that I'm interested in exploring my own religion beliefs. So because my dad's family, a lot of my relatives, they are Christian, and in my mom's family, they are heavily influenced by Buddhism. So I actually went to church in my college for 4 years, but I still don't identify as Christian. But that's when I got involved with working with children. So I think that was one of my passions.
Come from South Texas, Brownsville, Texas, which is a border town with Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Only child, single mom. Identify as cis, het, Latinx identified woman. I identify as an integrative psychologist, feminist, social justice minded psychologist that draws in from psychodynamic theory, interpersonal theory, sometimes use CBT and other mindfulness techniques with my clients in session. Based on what you had said earlier, I don't believe that we can provide therapy from an unbiased perspective, because I believe that our experiences shape who we are.
I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and my upbringing has shaped everything about who I am as a person. I come from a really large family, and my family is super family oriented. We're close, and we really have like a collectivistic view on life and how we interact with one another and the things that we do. And so for us, it's a belief that I am who I am, not for myself, not for myself alone, but also for the benefit of my loved ones. And that's a value that I hold dear. I hold the majority of my Christian values very dear. As I continue to grow, I've become a bit more liberal in some regards. And being that I was at a historically Black college, I was really able to learn a lot about the history of my people, of Black people, and our diaspora to the States. And I was able to begin unlearning so many things that I learned growing up in my grade school history courses. And it really helped me to feel empowered as a Black person.
National student from Taiwan, came to the US to study in my master and PhD.
I identify as a woman, clearly, and I'm a Black woman, but a Black woman who was born and raised outside of the United States. So I was born and raised in Ghana. So my concept of being Black and being a woman in Ghana is very different, from what I learned moving to the US. And I think my upbringing has strongly shaped my identity and my perception of the world, because I've learned to be Black in two different spaces. I've also learned to be a woman in two different spaces. I'm also a person who is bilingual, and I've had experience with speaking English with a different accent, and sort of how sometimes there are discrimination related to that I personally experienced. Also, growing up in a very ethnically diverse country has shaped my identity and my understanding of difference and accepting, acknowledging, celebrating diversity.
So I am born and raised in Texas, lived here my whole life. Come from a divorced family, raised by a single mother for a few years till my stepdad came in the picture. White male, which is a big identity here in the south of Texas, and so growing up, I realized there wasn't a lot of things I was great at, but I really like people. And that just kind of shaped what, when it came to college, it's like, what do I want to do the rest of my life? Try to find where the people are and find a career in people.
I was raised in India. I returned to the US for undergrad. So I returned here for college and I've stayed here ever since. So I've been in the US since 2006. So I remember that when I first started college in the US, I came here, although technically not an international student, I felt like one. As I reflect, it feels like such a blend. I think overall, maybe the leaning was more toward Indian values, but in some pretty core ways, my family values differed from my other Indian friends who were born and raised in India. And I think those are some of the subtle differences, I guess.
As part of my feminist orientation, I try to demystify the therapeutic process and let folks know why I'm choosing to go down certain paths versus others, why I'm asking certain things. And sometimes they may disagree with what I have to say, and maybe they're right and I'm off the mark. And then sometimes they're not ready to hear what I have to say. And a session or two later, they may come back and be like, you know what, I think that's right. I just wasn't ready to hear it. And so trying to have that open conversation about when we disagree. And so I think my own experiences as a woman of color, impacted me wanting to be a feminist-oriented psychologist. Having encountered microaggressions and racism and other forms of discrimination, sexism, that encouraged me to be a social justice-minded counselor. Therapy, I do bring that into the room. I do name microaggressions. I do say, wow, that sounds like you're reacting to these external, stressors of racism or homophobia. What is it like being on this campus as an LGBT student when it's a very cis-het, campus? But it's always biased. Just in selecting an orientation, we're biased. And what we ask our client, we're biased because we're choosing what we're going to ask.
9-10 years since I studied here. Yeah, so I think that definitely had great influence on my own identity and also how I approach a session with my clients.
I adopt a more culture-centered lens because I recognize how important that is.
With it. I went to a small rural school in Texas, which shapes a lot of my identity as a therapist. Very white school, not a lot of people of color at all.
So I think the way that my upbringing and who I am, the way that it shows is in that relational piece, because I'm able to connect with people simply because of the identities that I have.
We just shut down in the sense of I was in the room, but I wasn't really connecting with the client because all I could focus on was, oh crap, their views are completely different. And so it's almost like having a conversation with someone, but you're not really hearing what they're saying because they said one thing that you can't get past.
Right.
And that's not very helpful to the client.
Yeah.
Because they're here so I can listen to them. But if I'm not really listening, I'm not hearing them, I'm not helping them. But initially, that's how I would react, unfortunately. But now I've learned not to do that.
I guess had different views for marriage and also romantic relationship. So I didn't didn't agree with their belief about marriage and how they, intervened others' marriage. So I feel like I was holding a lot of anger when I was working with that client. And I noticed that in session, and also when back then I was a practice student, so I had to record my sessions to share with my supervisor. So when we were watching the video, my supervisor was like, it's pretty obvious that you don't like this one. I was like, yeah, I don't. So so we had to spend a lot of time processing what was it like for me to stay in the same room and work with this person. And that's when I identified I didn't like the client, I didn't agree with their beliefs, and I was angry when I was talking to them. However, my supervisor pointed out that that shouldn't be the focus of our work, because that's not, the client didn't come in and ask for my opinion about everything happening. So I was able to calm myself down and kind of remind me, we just need to focus on teaching the client how to manage their emotions.
Oh, absolutely. I think of one of my first clients from when I was getting my master's. I was doing a practicum. And I had a client who came in, and he grew up, his family, they were Catholic. And so they grew up practicing Catholicism. And once he got to college, he developed an agnostic way of thinking. And he said he really can't confirm or deny that God exists. He just believed that all religious people are just cowards, and they only ascribe to a religion so that they won't be afraid of dying. But in truth, they're just a bunch of cowards who lean on religion to help them become more comfortable with the afterlife. And me being a religious person, I was like, whoa, I wonder what he'll think of me if he knew that I was a Christian. And so that was just the thought. So I didn't feel offended, but I wondered, how would this impact the work that he and I do together if he knows that I am religious? Will he stop coming? Will he deem me as a coward, and I'm so cowardly that maybe I can't help him? And so one of my supervisors encouraged me to disclose. And I was very hesitant. I didn't do it immediately. I said, oh no, that's not even necessary. Like, why would I do that? He's progressing. And she said, well, this is a really good relational moment. And, you could do some interpersonal processing work, and then he can, all these other things. And so eventually I asked him, I said, what do you think about the work we've done together? And he had positive things to say, really wonderful things. And he commended me on, my work with him as his therapist. And I asked him, said, how would you feel? And what would you think if I told you that I was a Christian? And his face was bloodshot red. And I could just tell that he was like, oh no, I've said all these bad things about religious people. And what is a Christian? Oh my God, I could just see it all over his face. And he was just like, but then we talked about it. And, and I assured him that I did not feel offended at all. He came back and we continued our work together. And then he had a conversation with his parents about the resentment that he had towards them and his new beliefs. And we were able to work through all of those things. So there are moments when clients come in and their issues are related to things that are in direct opposition of who you are or values that you hold really near and dear to your heart. And you have to work through them. And you can choose to focus on the symptoms, which is what I did in the beginning. And, if you think that it will help the client meet a goal, then you can go a little deeper.
In my professional journey, absolutely. I've had instances where, I've worked or addressed clients who had very racist views, or clients who had pretty sexist views, and were either very direct about it or went about it in a very indirect way. And in most of those situations, I've had to either terminate the relationship, or talk to them about, where is this coming from? Is there a way that I can help the client to grow from this? But ultimately, I'm also a person. And so I'm not going to put myself in a work environment that's hostile.
I had the experience that the client would challenge whether I would be able to connect with them because of my ethnicity. So they would prefer the therapists from their own ethnic group speak their language, even though like we can both speak English. Asian is I discuss with the clients like to make sure, one, would this affect their therapy work? Is it a strong kind of factor? Second, would that be something they want to work on, like to process, to continue to work, and then challenge themselves and see if they can kind of, if what they worry about is actually a truth or not. Fortunately, my client decided to continue. So we did work and then build a connection and found more commonality than difference.
I think one time it was about religion and being, you know, in the beginning of my graduate program, and someone who was a very strongly an evangelical student, and, you know, wanting to explore that part of their identity, and that part of my identity is not very salient to me. And so sometimes feeling uncomfortable in the room, just hearing them talk about their religion and the importance of their religion when that wasn't the case for me. And so working in supervision about, like, I felt like, can I help this person? And working through supervision that, yes, I can, that it's like any other identity that I don't have, and just learning about the client and how to support them in their identity, and that I don't have to share that identity or feel that strongly about it, to be able to hear and support the student. I had like a white male supervisor, and we were watching tape one day, and he's like, you know, he's flirting with you, right? And I was just more self-conscious and maybe interpreting things that he was saying from a different perspective. And I think we worked in supervision as to maybe how to, you know, challenge him as to, you know, why he's sharing these things, like how to navigate sometimes, you know, a client having an attraction for you in the room, or you sometimes feeling drawn or attracted to a client. And, you know, what do you do with that? Like, you know, but still sometimes a client comes into my room and I'm like, oh, this person is really attractive, and that kind of throws you off. And what do you do with that? And
so she was living in a place, and her place was being painted. It was painting their home. It was a company owned by a Mexican family and a Mexican American family. And she had these internalized biases against Mexican people, prejudices against Mexican people. And she made a statement during our session. She said something to the extent of, they better not look at me or else I'll call Trump on their asses and get them deployed. Not in that moment, I was stuck. I just was quiet. The rest of the session, I just kind of stood there and nodded and because I really, at that point, it was hard for me to stay in the moment, because I was in my head and I was like, she just said that. That's a very serious thing to say. That could impact their family unit, their family dynamics. That could change people's lives. And for what? They didn't even do anything. Looking at you is worth all of that. And so this is the dialogue that I'm having with myself in my mind. And I sought supervision, and I said, you know, this moment happened and it really impacted me. The idea of a family's life being changed because of a statement made by a white woman, I can definitely relate to. Because as a Black person, historically, statements made against Black people, and many of them by white women, ended up in the demise of many Black people, specifically Black men. And so when she made that statement, it triggered me. I threw it in my supervisor, a very, very ballsy supervisor. She encouraged me. She said, talk about it. She said, because that can be a growing moment for your client. And because it was related to some things that my client had mentioned. You know what? I said, you know, our last session, you made a statement and I just haven't been able to stop thinking about it since you made it. And she was like, well, what did I say? And I brought it to her attention. And she was like, and so when I brought it to her attention and I gave my perspective of things, she said, I never thought about it that way. And then it turned into a very meaningful conversation, one that she found valuable. And she said, you know what, I'm going to be more intentional about the things that I say. And I'm going to think about why I even feel the need to say those things, and why I even have that thought process in the first place.
Asian American who was adopted from actually a small town in my hometown.
Okay.
To the US. So I didn't know at first. We worked for a while, and then she shared where she was adopted from, and I was like, that's so close to my heart. And some of her concern was she will never feel accepted here, like fully accepted here, and also part of her wants to see the place she grew, like she was born. Immediately I feel responsible for showing her a lot of things, like what does it look like over there, what was the people like, but I had to control myself because that's not the focus of our work. And so what I did later on was I shared with her, I feel the urge to share a lot with you, however it's not the focus of our work. So I can give you some resources that you can go explore on your own, and some of the traditions over there if you are interested in. So it just to recognize my reaction at the moment, but then shift back on to the client.
I think I said men who abuse women, just based on past experiences in my own life, things that really get me riled up. And again, learning and reflecting and figuring out, hey, there's going to be people that I see who admit to they abuse women and abuse, other people. Again, being in those situations, you realize that they're people as well. And all of people have pain, and all of people are hurt, and they all come from their own unique worldview. And God, the universe, whatever have you, has put two people together for an hour, 45 minutes, at this time. It might be the only time we get. So I can't waste that opportunity. And if I don't believe in their lifestyle, if I don't agree with them, something bigger than me has made that decision that this is where we're supposed to be right now.
Of course, I definitely that because in therapy, that what's important is like when I try to empathize my clients, like a lot of them might be coming from my own like emotional experience. So we might not have the same experience, but emotionally we might have some shared emotions that we can connect with each other. So I think one example I can think of is like when clients process a parent-child relationship, like their relationship, because most of my clients were college students. So if they process their relationship with their parents and they really had a bad relationship or disconnection in the family, I think from my own cultural background, like how in Chinese culture, we're very family oriented. So I will usually have like more, I think, like connection when clients process those experience and feel the pain that they're feeling, lacking of that connection with their loved ones, with their family. So depends on the situation. Like if it's it could be therapeutic. I will also share with them, like sharing how I'm feeling at the moment with them. Yeah, and so.
It was a client who had been sexually assaulted, and as they were doing their work in counseling and even going into some detail about this trauma, I think more than a direct trigger for me, I think it evoked unexpectedly a lot of emotion from me in the moment that I hadn't expected to show. I mean, it wasn't an outburst, but I found myself becoming tearful, and I found myself, sitting on the edge of my seat, really needing to remember in that moment, I am still this person's therapist. And that feeling more emotional does not mean that I veer off into a non-professional type of relationship, but that I don't want to be fake either. So it's not about being professional and fake. It's about professional and authentic somehow, which sometimes feels like they're at opposite ends, but they don't have to be. So I think in that moment, the way I managed it was, okay, it's bringing up this emotion, and that emotion is real for me right now. How can I allow it to show and yet not have that take up the space? That the space is still for the client, and that's my focus, but that the emotion that they see can let them know I'm still being real. Bull crying on my part, it was just showing on my face. The client didn't ask about it, and I hadn't said anything explicitly about the tears. I don't know if it would have been helpful to or not, but we had a relationship where it was common for me to share if there were times something the client was sharing was making me feel sad with them, or where I want to describe how what they are sharing has an impact on me, so that we can then talk about what impact that might be having on them. Still the focus returns to the client, but that doesn't mean that I'm a blank wall, that they're still interacting with another human being.
I'm a Christian, and in that I try my best to live Christ-like. And the biggest thing, that's the most important takeaway that I get when I look at Christ's life, is love, and how he was a lover of all people. And so when I meet people, even if our beliefs are different, my objective is to show them Christ-like love and care and compassion. And so when I have clients to come in who, and I'm a Christian and I'm also a liberal to a degree, so it's a little, it can be a little conflicting to some people, to really like traditional, very, very conservative Christians. They might look at me as like, are you sure you're a Christian, kind of thing? But nonetheless, for me, being a Christian is being a follower of Christ, and that's where I am. I have a deep and meaningful relationship with God. And so when I have clients who come in, my focus is really on what does my client need? What is going to be most impactful for my client? How are these thoughts of, or this desire to come out, how is this going to impact my client? I think it's important to live as your authentic self.
By me getting upset, it's me telling somebody that they're wrong and their opinion is wrong on some matters that we don't know. We don't know what goes on in the world. We don't know what goes on above the world. And so, yeah, they might say rude or hurtful things. That's part of life. I can leave my office today and somebody could come up and say something rude and hurtful. And I have a choice in that. And a lot of therapy comes back to a choice. And this is why I try to teach my clients a lot. We're presented with the choice. And so we can either have the choice of getting offended and being upset and immediately putting up a wall, or we can have a choice of saying, wow, you seem to have a lot of pain and frustration in that. I wonder where that comes from. And so we can dig deep. And in that, hopefully we can find some healing.
I perceive them as very entitled. Like they just needed a lot and they were entitled to it, and I was supposed to give it to them. And it triggered something in me. And when I was working with that client at first, I think as I reflect on it, when I think about it, I think a part of me was resisting. Because I could see, and the client was very entitled, and they were being demanding, and I was resisting because there's something about entitlement that bugs me. Because in truth, people do things for others out of the kindness of their heart, and And so entitlement, something about entitlement bugs me. I'm trying to figure that out. But I'm a really tender therapist. And so with that client, I was very direct. And in therapy, oftentimes it's appropriate to, challenge some of your clients' statements or help your clients challenge some of their own ways of thinking. And so I went directly to that. And so I talked about it with my supervisor, and my supervisor said, "What do you have against this client?" I said, "What do you mean?" And she was like, "Well, seems like she doesn't tickle your fancy. Like, it seems like something about her is bothersome to you." And so we talked about it. And then I realized that this client was demanding. She was demanding so much. And in the space, it almost seemed like I had to give into that. And I didn't want to. And there were some cultural things there, cultural, upbringings that made me feel like, you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. Because, that isn't fair. And so then my supervisor encouraged me to bring it back up. And so the next time I met with my client, I said, "You know what? The last time we met, I realized that I was really direct. And I perceived some of the things that you were saying as entitlement. And I want us to talk about it." And the client, she was like, "Well, I didn't think you were being too direct at all." She didn't even perceive it that way. She said, "I thought I just felt like you were giving me more room to think about things from a different perspective." And I said, "Well, good. I'm happy that you thought about it that way." But we talked about things, and then the client came back and she said, "You know what? She was like, people do tell me sometimes that I'm a lot." And so then we talked through it. So on the one hand, our cultural differences and the client's personality type did cause me to be a much more direct version of myself. But then I talked through it, and we ended up doing some really good work together.
I think in the beginning of my training, when that would happen, it would really terrify me, because I had this notion that I'm supposed to be blank and I'm supposed to be objective all the time, and I'm not supposed to have an opinion, or I'm not supposed to have a reaction. But I think as I continue to grow in my profession, I've learned that these things happen because, like you said, I'm a human being. And if someone said something to me outside of therapy, I would react. So then how am I not allowed to react? But it's the extent of my reaction. Am I taking over the client's session? And in situations where I look back and I'm like, oh, I could have handled that differently. I seek supervision. I talk to my supervisors. I talk to other therapists that have maybe had something similar to get a different opinion. And sometimes it's also helpful for me to talk through my reaction to kind of figure out in the process of talking, what happened? Why was I having such a strong reaction to that person? And would it be helpful to share the reaction that I was having with the client the next session? Because maybe they noticed and they didn't say anything. Or maybe if they say something like that to another person, that person may have a similar reaction that I was having. So it might be helpful for them to know. And we can talk about, what elicits such a reaction in people. So that's how I handle it. I talk to people about it. And then depending on if it's beneficial or not, I'll bring it up with a client in the next session. And we'll have that uncomfortable conversation. And sometimes it's not even uncomfortable. Sometimes they think it's funny. And, sometimes they're like, oh yeah, other people react to me in that same way. So I was not surprised. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, there's been probably more times than I could even count. Again, we come in with our own worldview. We come in with our own stress of life. And there have been times where I've just had a really crappy day, and I've come in and I've just thought, I don't want to see this person right now. Anyone else in the entire world but the person sitting in front of me would be better. And honestly, there's probably times where I just get annoyed. In fact, I'm thinking of one now where the client was like, hey, you seemed really annoyed with me right now. Again, being authentic and me trying to say, you know what, I kind of am. The way you're presenting is like this, and the way I'm receiving it's like this. Let's talk about that some more. And it turned out to be a really good session. And so with that, there's been a lot of times too where I've got to the end and I'm like, dang, I probably treated them pretty bad. I was probably colder than I usually am. What's that about?
Yes, I have felt that. You bring up such a good point. Yes, I think in terms of how elders are treated and relationships with elders, that has been a big difference culturally for me coming to the US. And I believe you're right. That has impacted how I see myself in relationship with a client that's older than me, especially if they are significantly older in a different season of their life than myself. And that still brings up some self-doubt for me. It still brings up some imposterism for me. Am I the most qualified person to work with this individual that's in a different season of their life? And so sometimes it takes a little more intentional reminding of myself that even with other clients, regardless of their age, we're still working with differences here. I'm not usually working with a client that's exactly like me. And so whatever approach that I'm taking to work, even within those differences, why can't the same be applied even with older clients? And then I try to remember too that if they are willingly seeking out therapy and willing to try it with a therapist that is younger than themselves, then that's a choice that they have made. And so I can remind myself that it's something they have chosen, and use that to help me remember there are things I do know and that I might be able to legitimately help this client with, and also open myself to the possibility that they may decide they'll feel more comfortable with somebody that can relate more to their specific experience, and that does not have to mean that it's necessarily a bad thing.
But one thing I can think of at the beginning of my training was interrupting the conversation, or giving the elders, my elderly patients, some like assignments, like handouts, for example, like a worksheet, things like that, because that's also another cultural value, like how authority figure and elderly person are respected a lot in the culture. So if my clients, for example, if my clients like way older than me, sometimes I feel that pressure of not being able to interrupt them as easily as I'm working with my college student clients. Yeah, so that's one thing happened when I did the practicum in a community setting, because most of the clients were older than me.
I certainly have that experience sometimes when I work with clients who are a little older than me or significantly older, because I am from a cultural space where you're taught to like not question elderly people or to not talk directly at elderly people. And so it becomes a really interesting dynamic when I have a client who's older than me, but I'm the one that's like leading therapy, or I'm the one that's like in charge of therapy. And, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, and I have to like remind myself that they're coming here for a service. And they're not my elder in the situation. Yeah, they're older than me, but they're coming in here for a service. And so it's okay for me to ask them certain questions that help me to make a better informed decision about treatment, and stuff like that. And I think something else too that maybe has shaped how I do therapy is I'm from a very collectivist culture. It's pretty similar to other Latin American cultures where family is very important, community is very important. You make decisions as a collective. So like it's, if you're making a very big decision, you talk to your parents or your elders or your siblings or, people that are close to you to help make that decision. And sometimes it's not like that here for some people. And so when I'm like helping them make a decision, sometimes I have to watch myself and not assuming that they're going to make that decision with other people in their lives.